All right, everyone, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to our session, The Electricity Economy, Preparing the Grid for AI's Load Growth. My name is Jalen Lewis, and I'm the events manager here at Peak, and I will also be your moderator today. I am joined today by Sean Walsh, the Chief Marketing Officer here at Peak, where he will discuss the top electricity predictions for the next decade. So before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. Questions will be answered via the Q&A chat following the session, and the webcast is being recorded and it will be made available following the session for you to rewatch or share with your colleagues. This is a monthly series, so be sure to watch out for our January session, Next Generation ICF, Optimizing Fusion Power with Spherical IMG Pulsar Arrays. Without further ado, I will now pass it off to Sean Walsh to get our session started today.
Thanks, Jalen. So this is going to be an interesting, meandering kind of conversation. In preparing the slides, it's one of the more difficult presentations that we do each year because predictions are a matter of as much about extrapolating facts and opinion. But this was a quote that Calvin Butler had at his recent Fortune event that I thought was incredibly important for us to start with, which is we're 5% of the economy, but we power the next 95. And that's not a metaphor, that's an absolute fact. And we think about everything else that we want to do, expand our domestic supply chains, grow the power grid, do AI and data centers, expand new homes to give people affordable housing. Take your pick. I don't care what it is. Every single thing comes back to the ability to generate and distribute power. And it's a really, really broad subject. So we've done our best to consolidate it. And what I'd like to do is sort of start with some table setting items before we go into the predictions. So when we think about what's happening, there was a couple of really interesting statements that came out of the GE Verona earnings call this past his last week or the week before. But part of what they're talking about in this is essentially they can produce about 20 gigawatts a year of power generation equipment. They're sold out in 25, 26, 27. They're sold out through 28, and they've already sold half of 29, and they expect to be sold out by 30 for in 2026 for 2030. Now, think about that in terms of this is not all going domestically. A lot of this is going internationally. And if we need to scale the grid, and this is the type of backlog we're dealing with, beyond the different types of power, the supply chain is going to be our biggest limiting factor. Second will be regulations. And there's a lot of opinions about regulations. Again, whether you like it, love it, or hate it, we're going to try and deal with what is, given this current administration and some of the global positions of various government agencies across the world. But the biggest obstacle to new power is going to be we can't get the equipment. So, a couple things that, if you'll pardon my expression, I want to state the obvious. Um, One of the biggest things I've seen from Secretary Wright at the DOE is AI is now bring your own power. They don't care what you generate as long as you do it yourself and you don't mess up the grid. So we see diesel generators at XAI in Memphis. They just announced a 600-acre solar farm. And, given some of the current administration's position on renewables, that may sound a bit out of alignment. But what we're going to discover in this conversation is there is no such thing as a bad form of electricity generation if you're trying to build a business. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from the predictions for the next decade is any form of electricity gets an equal seat at the table. So it's very simple, no power, no progress. We'll talk some more about what that means across the predictions. The power grid, as we talked about, is directly applicable to AI. If we expect to beat China in AI, our biggest issue is not technology, it is power. And when we talk about regulations, I'm going to tell you right now, all the regulatory stuff is going to change. They are going to step on toes. They're going to ignore people. it's probably going to be one of those situations where nobody's going to be happy about it. The producers won't get it fast enough. The consumers won't get it fast enough. The NIMBY crowd that doesn't want it in their backyard because data centers suck up power, raise cost, and use a ton of water aren't going to be happy because they're going to get overridden. And this is going to be one of those areas where the world's going to change and it's going to be driven in a very, very hard direction, especially through the current administration. And one of the biggest parts of this is we're going to move beyond the argument of green electricity. Whether you like renewables, whether you have strong opinions about them, they're going to be used, as will coal, as will nuclear, and everything else. We are about to move from the debate about what is good electricity versus bad electricity, and it'll be more of a debate about when can I get electricity. And then the last piece here is geopolitical spheres of influence. We are seeing the world go from a global supply chain to geographic influence areas. And those who dominate those areas, whether it's the United States and the North and South America, whether it's Europe, whether it's China and APAC, um, those who can export energy are probably going to have more influence over anything else, barring military action. And the ability to export energy sets the supply chain, it sets the standards. And the more complex those are, the harder it will be to scale and grow the electricity economy. So the IEA defined the age of electricity as a new phase in the global energy system where electricity demand grows significantly and it's driven by usage of AI. It used to be EV vehicles, and we're seeing a lot of those rules back off, especially in the US, but it's also starting in Europe. We're even seeing Porsche, who had, you know, for a motor-driven car company, had gone all in on EV, and they're starting to back off. And you're seeing with Volkswagen, you're seeing it with other people, you're seeing with the cancellation of the Ford F-150 Lightning. There is a definite rollback there. AI is very simple. It uses more power, GPUs versus CPUs, memory, storage. The amount of computational requirement is almost 10x for every AI inquiry. And think about how many tens of billions of those AI inquiries are happening today with human beings. And as AI automation gets added, they're going to be done by machines. And it's going to grow dramatically. Our friends at JP Morgan say $5 trillion will be spent on new AI infrastructure. So just kind of let that sink in. The total US GDP is about 24 trillion. We're talking about a 20% adder. And 2 trillion is going to be added to utilities, both from the utility companies, but the tech giants and the oil companies are getting in on this game as well, because it's a chance to vertically integrate and own the supply chain in a very, very different way. And they will turn those into highly profitable segments. And if there's one thing we've learned about oil companies and tech giants, they love earnings per share. So don't expect the price of electricity to go down. And that statement I made is in direct contrast to what Secretary Wright recently said, um, that he sees energy prices flattening. My concern is that the demand is exceeding supply, and until that changes, I think we're going to continue to see increases in electricity pricing versus decreases. And this is a quote from the Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. He said, "I have inventory of chips from NVIDIA, memory from Micron, storage from Seagate, and I can't deploy it because I have data centers that don't have power." And you can look up the articles from NVIDIA and dozens of other tech giants. This is their number one problem. And if we're in competition with China for AI, this is the reason we will lose. It won't be because our chips aren't better. It won't be because our technology isn't better. It'll be because we can't put them online. And this is something we absolutely have to fix over the next 10 years. All right. Sorry, my screen is not moving. My mouse went away on me. Um, so this is just a sampling of all the different ways that the big tech giants are getting into power. And they will not only generate the power they need, but they will also add incremental power to the grid. But it doesn't matter. Microsoft is doing solar and renewables. They're working with Constellation Energy to bring Three Mile Island back online. They have already signed a power PPA with Helion Energy for the first nuclear fusion plant that they're hoping goes online in 2028. And you can look across this: nuclear, renewables, geothermal, solar, gas turbines, diesel generators, you name it. If there's a way to generate power, they're going to do it. And this is a completely different model than what we were leaning into just 4 years ago. But AI has completely changed this game. And the part that's interesting is most of my career I've worked in the IT tech side. And you would talk about the number of servers we're deploying in a data center, the number of racks that'll be in there. Now it's measured in how much power is pumped into it. And that's an incredible change of perspective as we go forward. And every one of these companies have their own venture firms that are also investing in this. And the amount of cash going into this is absolutely phenomenal. And arguably, these guys have infinite checkbooks. Compared to the availability of equipment on the supply chain, they can buy everything there is, and they will continue to bid and drive the price up because the cost of power versus not being online with all the CPU and GPU capabilities they need is detrimental to their EPS. And this is why you're going to see them become far bigger players than most people realize over the next decade. So this is a forecast from the IEA about global power consumption. And you can see here that coal isn't really going away. Why is that? China and India. Yes, we're still we're saving a few coal plants in the US. We'll probably put a few more back online, but China and India, for where the US and EU have dropped, they are more than picking up the slack. Natural gas, I actually thought this number was a little low personally. I think this is going to grow substantially. But again, the primary driver here is availability of those turbines. And as we talked about with GE, they're kind of sold out for the next 4 years. Nuclear will continue to see grow, but that's going to take time. And what does that leave you with? It leaves you with renewables. Why? Plentiful supply coming out of China. It's cheaper to get it online, and it's faster to get it online. Whether or not they like it, whether or not they throw it away when fusion comes along, or if they can get SMR nuclear plants to do it cheaper over time, we don't know yet. But the choice of businesses have right now is don't operate and expand or go for what is available. And it's very clear that going for what is available is winning right now in this argument. All right. This is a forecast from Wood Mackenzie on where the new energy is growing. And again, you can see solar, battery storage, top two, wind, pretty flat, natural gas growing substantially. And part of that's driven by cost of energy. Solar, geothermal, wind, gas, it's just costs less and it's faster to get online. And that is going to be the ultimate key for winning the economic battles over the next decade. These are charts that come from Clearview via Bloomberg, and they're showing the number of projects that are actively being deployed, renewables versus coal, gas, nuclear. I expect this to change dramatically over the next 5 years. The current administration and China and India are incredibly power hungry, and they are going to drop the rules and the hurdles to making that happen. So as we watch this map evolve over the next decade, it's going to change substantially with far more on the gas and nuclear power side of the world. What does that mean for electricity cost? Well, quite honestly, I think it's going to continue to see prices in the US go up. You can see they're going to grow moderately in Europe, but they will probably come down in China. Why? State sponsored. Um, the simple facts are is that, they can continue to do this over time and they will drive this very, very hard. Now, I know the chart shows that inclining a bit, but I think it's actually going to go down because they know this is incredibly powerful for them, and they do a better job of harnessing hydropower than any other nation on the planet. So we'll see if the predictions are right about that, but that's my other thought on that system. So what are the big moves the DOE is making? Number one, use AI to optimize fusion and optimize the power grid. Can we squeeze more power out of it? A lot of solid state technologies around solid state switching, digital transformers, those sorts of things haven't gotten deployed because they're expensive. I think that's going to change because they enable you to use AI to have better allocation and better distribution. Combine that with the accelerating capabilities of AI, and I think we're going to address many of the challenges required to close fusion energy in this decade. The US has committed to putting 10 new reactors under construction by 2030. The IAEA says they expect nuclear power to double worldwide. And again, we have fairly well-defined examples in France and other places across the world. There's always going to be concerns about that, but I think the risks are less than they were in systems that were built in the 70s and 80s. And they have thrown out the rule book and many of the people at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to start over. AI, as we talked about, is considered a strategic requirement. The DOE has a number of big initiatives around both AI and quantum computing, and they're going to enable power to make those things happen. How are they going to do that? They're going to do it on government land where people can't argue with them. Whether it's national forests, whether it's government-owned land, whether it's military bases, the DoD is probably going to become the experimental location for tons of nuclear power and other types of power generation, where they can avoid state red tape. And they have changed the position of fusion energy to move it up to the top level inside the DOE. They have demoted renewables, which again, given the statements of Secretary Wright and the current administration, not a surprise. But I do think this is going to accelerate the delivery of commercial fusion. Now, I'm not saying there isn't some science left to be done. I'm not saying there isn't significant engineering problems. There are significant supply chain problems. But that is the place where we are seeing action from the US government. Maybe not in the raw R&D space, but we are seeing it in the supply chain and manufacturing space. So let's talk about what's happening legislatively that have been voted on recently. The first is the SPEED Act, and this is your regulatory sledgehammer. This is basically moving things to the feds away from states and regions. It's limiting the number of lawsuits. It's simplifying the number of protests that can be there. And a lot of states have gotten away with avoiding stuff by using essentially a pocket veto model for not approving stuff. This is going to be a big, big fight. And make no mistake, the administration is going to push very, very hard. This will end up in the lap of the Supreme Court, and given the decisions we've seen so far that are very pro-business from this Supreme Court, I think it's very likely they're going to win, and that's what's going to change the regulatory environment as profoundly as anything else in history has done. Next is the Fusion Advanced Manufacturing Parity Act. This is basically compete with China. This is give tax credits, give manufacturing credits for building stuff here in the US, and provide critical minerals so that we're not dependent on China. Um, don't see that change, or excuse me, I see this going through very, very quickly as well. We are still going to end up buying a lot of stuff from China for a long time, not because of the uh, access to the absolute critical minerals, but the processing involved. More than anything else, it's the processing plants that we don't have here. It's much like oil, and that our number one problem is we don't have enough oil refineries. We can certainly produce the oil. Then the Advanced Gets Act for upgrading the grid, um, dealing with congestion, getting advanced components so you can drive AI. Similar in the Electric Supply Chain Act, very similar to the fusion one. Help us build out what we need, identify the vulnerabilities, and create incentives for reducing foreign dependencies. And then there's another permitting act that basically removes what states can protest about, which is pretty much water quality at this point. It requires a 1 year deadline versus multi years. And if they don't act, then it acts like a pocket veto and says, you've approved it whether you want it to or not. And they're going to try and stop the pause game. They're going to make the clock start harsh. And again, there's a lot of opinions on many sides of the fence, but in the spirit of assessing the business world in terms of what is being done, this is what's being done. I am not going to read through this whole one. We'll send this out for folks, but the big things that I want to make sure that we take away from this is, the president has established his energy dominance council. He is going to push every form of fossil fuel there is, not going to worry about air quality or other issues. Business expansion takes priority over that. He's going to fast track nuclear, and they're going to use eminent domain and permitting reform to drive grid deployment. And that's not going to change. China's going to do that times five. And they have enough coal reserves and other sorts of things that they don't care about that. Air quality and other issues. They're going to win in a war of attrition, and they are not going to give up. The EU is still continuing to push renewables, though we're starting to see cracks in that as we go forward. But they probably have the strongest nuclear base and the best acceptance of that. And I think we'll see that grow dramatically. And this is just a look inside the AI race. So these are some comments from Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA. But China will beat beat the US in the AI race thanks to lower energy costs and looser regulations. They are subsidizing power, and that's how they're doing it. And they don't care about rules, they don't care about anything else. Um, they are playing this game as aggressively as they can because they know AI is the secret not only to economic growth, but to military advantage. And they are not going to lose that uh, battle if they can avoid it. So here are a look at how data centers are growing versus what's built, what's underway, and we can't even power these today. And then this is what's planned. Um, there is a massive disconnect between demand and supply of energy. And that's why I go back to the statement that we're going to have a policy of every form of energy is good as we go forward. And this is where the money is coming from. Amazon, Microsoft, Alphabet, Google, and Meta. They essentially have endless reserves of cash, and they generate tens of billions of dollars in free cash flow from their operation. Oracle's probably the one exception, given some of their debt financing. They're not on this chart, which would be another $50 billion on top of this. But these guys have more money than the Rockefellers and Carnegie and all the others from the uh, industrial age, and they are spending it. And just to give you an idea, this is a map from datacentermap.com, and it shows all the data center clusters in the world. Today, about 11,000 facilities and about 20 to 50 megawatts per. By 2035, they expect that number to more at least double. And the power consumption because of that original, that 3x growth in AI, and that'll be 5x as we go forward because the next generation of chips consume a lot of power. AMD is fixing some of that, but NVIDIA is power hungry. And you got to remember, it's not just the chip, it's the memory, it's the storage, it's the networking between the racks that those clusters use. So every single element of AI compute consumes 3 to 5x more power. And all of these data centers are going to grow. They're going to put more GPU technology in, and they're all going to want more power as we go forward. Then you combine that with the new ones. This is some data that came from CNBC, and it's talking about where the growth is inside the US. So, probably not a big surprise for the big tech areas, Virginia, Texas, California, Illinois. I have to admit, I was a little surprised at the number of data centers in Ohio, because Peak is trying to build a factory in Ohio, and our biggest problem is we can't get power allocated. But you can see the number of data centers in each of these places and what that's done to electricity cost in the over 2024. And I don't see any reason to believe that that number shrunk in 2025, nor do I expect it to shrink over the next 5 to 6 years. So today they consume about 6% of all power. Depending upon who you talk to, that number is going to reach 12 to 14%. Um, People might argue about where it is in that range, but no one's telling us it isn't going to at least double. And the other big challenge we have is China holds the supply chain at 50 plus percent on 12 of the top 20 power grid systems. Most of the US factories are maxed out and can't build more because they, ironically, need more power to build power gear. And as their CEO, Strazek, said, this is not a problem you're going to fix in 5 years. It's going to take 10 to 15 years. And I think that's one of the other things we need the proverbial moonshot government support to fix, um, both for national security, economic growth, and competing on a global scale. And this is just a high level overview. I originally had this with the top 20. I moved it to the top 10 for readability, but the story is pretty much the same. Long lead times, 18 to 36 months on gas and steam turbines, 20 to 48 months on power transformers, and we can run through the list. And China owns about half the supply chain in terms of leadership. And this is something that every major economy in the US, EU, and in China and India and other places that they need to really contemplate what their strategic risk is. So, with all of that, now let's get into the predictions. So, I've talked a lot about the era of electricity, and it's really the era of everything in electricity. Every option, every time you can get it, everywhere you can put it, every single day add more. The debate of green versus brown is over. It is a question of when I get energy is more important. It's even more important than the cost because when determines when you can change your business, when you can scale it, what services you can provide. And that is going to be the overarching theme we see from regulatory, capital expenses, supply chain, and every other form of power grid move we need to make for the next decade. Power wars. This is not just about the ability to deliver electricity. This is about global influence. This will change those who not only can build their own energy but export it to be the standard in the world will control the next century. We're seeing huge changes in the dollar-based oil. We're seeing it, the company or countries that ship the most product get to determine the commercial standards. They get to determine what you have to make in the supply chain. And winning the power wars and the AI war is paramount to leadership on a global stage. The regulatory playbook is do it now. Think about everything else that you've seen, and it's going to change. There will be places that fight it, without a doubt. But ultimately, in the US, this is going to end up in the Supreme Court, and right now they're incredibly business friendly. And I think almost everyone who argues against grid expansion is going to end up losing at that level. We are seeing new rules for every form and every place in the power grid. It hasn't all hit yet. There's still a couple years of court arguments. But one of the things we've discovered is that when these pro-business things go into place, generally speaking, even the next administration doesn't take them out because they know in order to compete globally, they're going to have power. And there's going to be a lot of unhappy people, but it's going to happen. Tech giants. When we talk about bring your own power, it's not only bring your own power, it's let's turn that power into profit. They're not just going to do this and grow their profits to service their needs. They're going to start putting power onto the grid in general. And we're going to see the same thing from the oil giants as they vertically integrate. So the oil giants see an opportunity now, given the price of oil, to increase their revenue and profits and protect their oil generation and natural gas generation by getting into the utility game. The tech giants are doing the same thing, but from the other side of the equation, which is to enable their AI data centers. And they are not going to do this in a benign fashion. They are going to do it for capitalistic reasons. This one is one of the ones that I think is the most interesting. It may even be a longer shot in some ways than fusion energy, but data centers in space. So before people say this is crazy, solar is plentiful and it's 24/7 in space, which is one of its biggest problems on the planet. The two of the biggest consumers of AI power are have their own rocket fuel companies or rocket ship companies with SpaceX and Blue Origin. NVIDIA just dumped $5 billion into this. Um, Space technology has advanced a lot. It's not tied to NASA anymore. You don't need those, you don't have the regulatory overhead in the same way. China's going to be at it. We are seeing India get into this space. Um, this may seem a bit far-fetched to some, but I don't think it is. I think it's going to happen and in addresses many of the cooling challenges that you also have in the US, which will lower the cost of compute. They got to figure out the bandwidth transfer problems, but don't be surprised to see this one go from the backbench to the front very, very quickly over the next decade. Solar and battery just going to keep scaling and scaling and scaling. It's fast, it's relatively cheap. Despite some of the, I will say, local communities not liking solar farms, there's a lot of land. I live in Colorado, and I recently took a drive from here to Kansas City. And I got to tell you, for 800 miles, there's a lot of empty land that they can put solar panels on. And if you live in California and you get past Riverside and Palm Springs, there's another 400 miles till you hit Arizona and another 200 miles before you hit Phoenix, where there's a lot of land you can put solar panels. I'm certain there are similar situations globally, and don't expect solar to go away. It is not going to get pushed aside. It will continue to be the largest source of new power generation for the next decade. Fossil fuels, they are not going to shrink. There was this fundamental belief system that renewables grow, fossils shrink, power demand stays relatively flat. That was the formula for the previous decade. That is not the formula for the next decade. Fossil will grow, and it will grow because the demand is there. I think it'll be much more on natural gas overall than coal, except in China and India and some of the developing nations. Um, but fossil fuels are going to get as much of a renaissance as nuclear is, which is kind of the next slide. Um, there are a lot of people who say it's supposed to double by 2050, was what the IEA says. I think it's going to more than triple. The US is going to use military bases and other ways to get that power out, and then they're going to sell that power as well. Because the military bases don't need it, but they give them a way to get around regulations. And we are going to see, just as we are seeing this current administration essentially create sovereign wealth and investments, as they've done in Intel, as they've done in MP Materials, as they're talking about doing in quantum. Make no mistake, nuclear power will be essentially a sovereign fund business for the federal government as we go forward. AI is going to be an interesting play. So, on one dimension, AI is going to help us squeeze more capability out of the power grid. It's going to drive more solid state infrastructure. It's going to make our grid more efficient. It's also going to consume almost everything that the power grid finds a way to save. Um, and it will be used to help advance fusion and other energy development technology as we go forward. Um, and this is one of the reasons why funding the power demands of AI is so critical. It's a bit of a circular argument, but you got to have AI to make the grid efficient. You need AI to create fusion, and that is what enables you to hopefully solve the AI consumption problem. I've mentioned the use of the U.S. military a few times. They will start with SMRs. They will accelerate approvals, deployment, test data, and everything we need to know to make these things more operational. Um, like everyone, when you start talking about nuclear power, there's always concerns about safety. Um, but right, wrong, or indifferent, we are going to see the military used to do this. Exxon announced that they're starting to get into the power generation business in Louisiana. And why are they doing this? Well, the market is growing substantially. And once you get embedded in it, it's revenue forever. And it allows them to vertically integrate, and it allows them to have a lower cost basis than the companies they're selling to. Yes, they're going to be competing, but what are those other folks going to do if they already have gas, coal, and other types of plants? They don't have any choice. They have to keep buying it. So this is going to be an incredibly strategic move that we see by oil companies across the globe. And the last one is, I believe that all of these investments, the elevation of its priority and what China is investing will enable us to solve both the science and the engineering, and we will see commercial fusion online by 2035. Now, it's going to be got a long path to build thousands of those plants over time, but I absolutely believe this is going to happen. Um, and that is the end of my pontification of the future. So with
Right.
that, Jalen, let's turn it over to questions.
Perfect. Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and move into that Q&A portion. The first question is going to be from Larry. The fossil fuel industry is subsidized in multiple ways, including the tax code and failure
Yep.
to charge for damage to the commons pollution and health impacts. How does this subsidy impact your thought process? I realize this administration is pro fossil fuels and pollution. Is there any possibility of a more equitable approach to fossil fuels by revamping the tax code and charging for pollution and health impacts?
Larry, I'll be blunt. Not in this administration. Um, I I think that there should be a swap between if we're going to take steps to use fossil fuels, that there should be a step towards some other non-polluting, even if that's nuclear and fusion. If you don't want to support wind and solar, so be it. But the short answer is no. I don't think it's going to get better. You look at the Chevron ruling from the current Supreme Court. You look at the rollback requirements on carbon credits. You name it. This administration's made their decision and they're executing to it. So no is the short answer.
Our next question is how many nuclear plants will be opened?
So this is I'll quote the data from the IAEA, getting all my I's and A's and E's straight. They say there's about 450 active plants today. There are 40 or so in construct, or excuse me, 63 in construction. The U.S. has committed to adding 10 more to that. And I believe with deployment of SMRs, you'll see that number go from 63 to 163. They are going to do this in a very, very aggressive fashion.
Our next question is have we abandoned the goals of green energy?
Uh, so if we define the goals of green energy as clean, then yes, I think this administration is fundamentally saying, hey, um, the production of power and the national security and economic impact and the requirement to win the global AI race and have national independence of energy production is more important for the next decade than that. I believe people in the administration would say we are a champion of nuclear, which does not produce the same CO2 that natural gas and coal does. We are champions of fusion. Look at what we're doing to make that happen, which will also produce non-CO2 producing power, and their same efforts with geothermal. So I believe the administration would say we are developing three new power sources that we think are better solutions. The EU is still going to continue to do that. Um, China is, of course, the world's largest producer of PV solar panels and wind and other sorts of things. And they're producing as much or more solar as they are coal and other sorts of energy. So I don't think that's a complete abandonment, but I don't think the priority is green first. The priority is profit, economic growth, security, and independence. Then, we recognize that if we can do that with technologies that we could ultimately migrate over the next 50 years, we'll do that. So I don't think it's all bad, but it's certainly not what it was 5 years ago.
Following up on that question, will power production from coal start growing again?
Yeah, I think it will. Um, Particularly in India and China, they have the resource. It's relatively straightforward. And again, I go back to the supply chain point, which is what power plants can they build? Which ones can they get their hands on? Because there's a limited number and there's going to be a lot of competition for it. And again, if they have to choose between economic goals and CO2 goals, um, they've proven hands down that they will go for economic goals. But again, they are doing nuclear, solar, wind, and everything else that goes with it.
Our next question comes from Rashid. Nuclear fission chain reactions and fusion, along with renewable, can be the way to go, right? How about across the border imports from Mexico and Canada?
Um, with Canada's hydropower, I really, really hope we do that. They have tremendous uranium reserves that we can leverage. I don't know enough about Mexico to really give you any commentary there, but I would like to think that again, my sort of repetitive theme of economic development will lead the power choices, but the corollary to that is they want independence. So they might be a little risky, as we saw with some of the policy fights earlier this year when Ford, who's the premier, I don't know if he's premier or I don't know what the right Canadian term is for their province lead. I know it's not governor. Um, Tried to slap a tariff on power coming into the US from Canada. Those lessons, I think, are striking really hard in Washington, and they're going to be very reticent about it. But it certainly is a viable option if they choose to exercise it. And again, the comments about nuclear fission, that's why I say I believe they're going to use military bases as the way to address early deployments and faster deployments of new nuclear solutions, especially SMRs.
And you talked a lot about fusion. Do you really think that fusion is possible by 2035 if leaders like Tammy Ma at NIF question the timeline?
So I am not going to claim that I know more than Tammy Ma or the folks at NIF. Um, what I can tell you is that Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Branson, you can run down the list of some of the smartest people in the world, have not only invested billions of dollars into fusion, they are betting that that's going to happen in the future. And right now, I still believe that it is possible. And the big variable to solve the science, I think, is AI. Is that prior to this, we had to build everything ourselves. We didn't have the scale of modeling. We didn't have quantum computing, and we didn't have the ability to test things at the speed that we can now. And I do believe the rate of science and the rate of engineering solutions and the rate of defining how the new materials need to be constructed in order to support this are going to accelerate in the next decade in ways that uh, have not been previously possible. And that's why I do believe it is not an unrealistic expectation by 2035.
Our next question comes from Sandra. Are the suppliers of electrical components the data providers that are feeding the AI models, and who else is feeding the AI model?
So if you look at AI today, there's five big components that go into AI. So the first is the core GPU that does the generative work, and AMD has some chips that do inference. So if you look at the two big chip suppliers in here, you've got NVIDIA, you've got AMD. You have Google with their Tensor processing unit. Amazon is developing their own. Broadcom is developing their own. Behind that, you have the big memory guys, SK Hynix, Intel, Micron, and Samsung. Then you've got the networking infrastructure that takes all of these GPUs and clusters them together. That is was originally developed by a company called Mellanox, and that is part of NVIDIA. And they own that lock, stock, and barrel. Um, then behind that, you have the data center providers, the Equinoxes and those sorts of folks of the world. Um, And then you've got the storage providers, which again are usually a different form of memory, but flash memory versus DDR memory that goes on the motherboards. And those are your big players. And these guys are in lockstep. Um, and these are the companies that are feeding that model. They're the ones that are driving the power consumption. And there's obviously more to this. This is actually more my background is data center building and that sort of thing. What I can tell you is that there is not if you look at the top 10 companies in valuation today, NVIDIA, Broadcom, Tesla, um, Avago Broadcom, and their valuations, all those top 10 companies, Apple included, well, I think the one exception that would be Saudi Aramco in valuation. They are all building components for this system. Um, I know that's a pretty roundabout answer. I don't know if that fully answered it, Sandra. Let me know in drop another question if I didn't answer that specifically enough.
Our next question comes from Daniel. Please cover basics on how Peak Nano will help in the grid AI power supply. Also, is Peak working with cell manufacturers for commercially available ultracapacitor cells?
Uh, there we go. Sorry, Daniel, I'm looking at that. So there's a couple of fundamental ways. So basically, if you look at Peak's technology, its number one thing is that we're able to store more energy in a smaller footprint. So we've worked a lot on that. Second is we've blended plastics in our nanolayered structure so that we increase lifetime and longevity. So let me give you a couple of different examples of that. Most of the new data centers are moving to DC power versus AC power. So they need the ability to store more energy and distribute that more smoothly throughout the data centers. That's where capacitors are going to help on that side. On fusion energy, we help generate higher pulse cycles for firing laser-based systems for generating fusion, and we help generate longer sustainable pulses for magnetic fusion for compressing the plasma together and keeping it from the sidewalls at 100 million degrees so that it doesn't blow up. Obviously, we do this in conjunction with the magnetic systems in the tokamaks and stellarators. Um, but in all of these cases, capacitors are one of those fundamental pieces of how power systems work, how power is distributed, how power is refactored. In the EV world, as they move to high voltage inverters, the temperatures go from 85 degrees to around 150 degrees C, and our nanolayered structured material enables us to run at up to 135 degrees C constant, and that means they need less power and cooling, and it means EVs charge faster. We can run more power and charge cars faster. So all of these things play into it. And again, we are one piece of this infrastructure. So we work with the capacitor manufacturers, we work with the EV charger manufacturers, we work with the fusion companies, we work with the folks that are building power substations and all of those pieces. And the other thing that I talked a lot about was the move to solid state switching and transformers. Like high voltage inverters, they run at higher temperatures that the current generation of biaxially oriented polypropylene kind of maxes out around 105 degrees C before it starts losing energy storage. We take that up a couple levels, maintain the energy storage, give you higher energy density and longer lifetime. So those are the ways in which we're playing in that world. I have to admit, the ultracapacitor cells, I would have to default that to one of our engineering guys to go deeper on that. But Jalen and I can pose this question to Dr. Tomko and let him answer that.
Sounds good. I think we have time for just one more question.
Okay.
So this last question comes from Jagath. Apologies if I misspoke on your name, but is carbon neutrality by 2050 possible around the corner, or does this new raise in the electric demand make this impossible?
I think I have to answer that in two ways. I believe it is still possible, and I'll tell you why. Because despite the current US administration not being a big proponent of renewables, they are a proponent of three technologies that have the ability to get to carbon neutral, which is fusion, geothermal, and nuclear fission. And if we are successful with those, 2050 might be a bit of a stretch because of the lateness. If 2035 is when we get our commercially viable fusion, it's going to take a couple decades to build those machines and get them online and do all the other stuff. But I do think there's a path that's still there, actually. Um, you know, Despite my beating of the economic and national security drums, I do believe some of the technologies are being invested we're investing in still give us a path to get there, and solar ain't going away. Um, the part that we also have to work on, Jagath, is what it takes to build those components. because the production of the things to get to clean energy and low carbon footprint aren't always as clean as we hope they are too. So there's two dimensions to that problem to solve. The second is the policy part where they will let fossil fuel run as fast as we're able to consume it. So hopefully we are successful with fusion, fission, and geothermal and continue to drive solar to help offset that.
All right. That's going to conclude our electricity economy webcast for today. If you have any questions that have not been answered, which we do have quite a few, we will reach out to you directly with all of those answers. So thank you to all of our viewers for joining us today, and thank you to Sean Walsh for his insights on the next decade of electricity. So if you are interested in joining us again, please pay attention to your inbox where you will receive the slides from today, any information regarding your questions, and also collateral around our discussion. We will also be having our next webinar in January called Next Gen ICF Optimizing Fusion Power with Spherical IMG Pulsar Arrays. If you have any topics you would like to see, or if you would even like to join and be a panelist, please reach out to us at what'snext@peaknano.com. So thank you again for attending and